The next 3 hours is your chance to participate in a discussion with one of today's leading radical journalists. Join us as In Depth welcomes Alexander Cockburn, columnist for The Nation magazine and co-editor of the political newsletter Counterpunch. Mr. Cockburn's books includes Corruptions of Empire, The Golden Age is in Us, and Whiteout, The CIA, Drugs, and the Press. His latest, co-authored with Jeffrey St. Clair, is End Times, The Death of the Fourth Estate.
Alexander Cockburn, what does it mean to you to be a radical?
It means basically initially challenging pretty much everything that's put before you in either audio or visual form or in literature or in journalism. Obviously it has a social and political vision behind it. I mean, radical is like one of these words like liberal. It's very hard to even get a fix on it anymore. 20 years ago, liberal meant something very different from what it does now, I think. Radical really means that you don't necessarily regard, in fact, you absolutely don't regard the Democratic Party as about as far left as you can go on the American political spectrum. It's seriously to the left, as far as, I mean, there can be radical right-wingers, you know, mad dog people, and of left and right. But radical essentially means really unsparing criticism of the system, and beyond it, a constructive vision of how things could be better.
When did you first know that you were a radical?
Well, when my father was a radical. My mother, of course, because he was a journalist, and he hoped, he was tough. We grew up in Ireland in the 50s, and my mother hoped that I'd be the executive of an oil company and make lots of money. And by the time I was 16, when I was going on peace marches and stuff like that, I decided that I wanted to be a journalist. And I guess that's when I really realized I wasn't going to be an oil company executive. I was going to be a radical.
Who was your
I was a radical.
Who was your father?
My father was Claude Cockburn, a very well-known journalist and writer. Might be known in this country by many younger people now if they ever go watch movies. As under the name James Helvig, he wrote the novel Beat the Devil, which was made into a famous movie, filmed by John Huston. But he was very, very well known as, he was fought in Spain. He was a communist in the 30s. He then became a sort of well-known, again, to use the word radical. He worked with Private Eye, which is a well-known English satirical muckraking paper. He did volumes of autobiography. In fact, Counterpunch books are going to republish his memoirs under the title I, Claude, and the Fall. And he was a huge influence on me.
The movie from Beat the Devil, people might, as you said, might have seen. It had what? Gina Lola Brigida.
Gina Lola Brigida. They had Janet Leigh. They had Robert Morley, Humphrey Bogart.
Humphrey Bogart.
It's kind of a confusing movie. It's a cult movie. People absolutely love it. The script is attributed on the credits to Truman Capote, who I think wrote the final scene. But most of the great lines in the movie, which fans of the movie can recite ad nauseam, were done by my dad, who wrote it under the name James Helvig. Because in the 50s, in the Cold War, Houston, who was a friend of my dad's, they thought Claude Cockburn would be kind of a bit edgy.
Because he was a communist?
Well, McCarthyism was going on, and they didn't want to get, you know, untimely questions raised. And this was, you know, the era of, I guess, House of Un-American Activities Committee and so on.
Your father left the Communist Party?
Uh-huh.
When?
In the 40s.
Why?
He felt he didn't have some big... he felt that it just wasn't being effective. It was going nowhere. I mean, the heroic period was the 30s. He fought in Spain in the Spanish Civil War for the Republic. He thought by the late 40s they just weren't going anywhere, and he relocated. My mother's Irish, and we grew up in Ireland, and he just started a new life in Ireland. And in Ireland, he was, it was tough because Ireland was a very poor country, and he was a lefty, and the Cold War was really getting going. So he wrote the big kill, if you could get it, was to get a story published in the Saturday Evening Post. That was $5,000 in 1950s dollars. You could live for a year on that.
So have you spent any time thinking about what it is about you that came from each of them, your parents?
Yeah, they're a good deal. I mean, I think my father sort of taught me a lot about writing and the disciplines of writing. got up at 5 and whacked away on his typewriter. My mother was a country person. We grew up in the country. She raised horses. I got all my liking of the country and horses and just that kind of a life. My father didn't like horses, thought they were detestable and dangerous creatures, so we divided on that. So I think I got a lot from both of them.
This is a picture of you. You must have been, what, 3 or 4? I don't know if we can show
I
it.
don't know.
There we go.
There it is. Look at him. There's the sinister lefty in the background. This is my mother. And that's the house is Myrtle Grove, which now belongs to my cousin, which is where Sir Walter Raleigh smoked the first tobacco in Ireland. He used to live in that house.
And you lived in Ireland because?
That's where my mother came from. My mother hated England and London. She thought it was completely detestable. And so the minute she and my father met in the late 30s, and we spent the war kind of, I was an evacuee. I was born in 41. And our house was blown up by a V2, German V2, and in, 42 or 43. And by 46 and 47, my father was out of what he'd been doing. And then we went to Ireland, to my mother's great relief.
Where can people read you today?
They can read me every week on our Counterpunch website, www.counterpunch.org, which Jeffrey Sinclair, a co-editor, and I do, and it's a site that goes up every day, 5 new articles, and pretty much every weekend I have a piece. Then I do a column, and have done a column since 1984 in The Nation magazine, Beat the Devil, named for the movie, which I do all the time. And then that's pretty much these days it. I do a syndicated column, which goes out to a bunch of papers.
And Counterpunch is also in a printed form?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, in Counterpunch, twice a month we do a newsletter, Counterpunch, and 22 issues a year. And I quite often have articles in that.
Your newest book, which just recently came out, series of essays along with Jeffrey St. Clair called End Times, The Death of the Fourth Estate. What is End Times? What is that? Well,
End Times is a play. Actually, Jeffrey thought of it. I think it's a good title. Well, End Times, of course, in apocalyptic eschatology, you know, the end time is like the end of everything, if you look at it from the Christian fundamentalist point of view. So there's a slightly apocalyptic note in there. End Times also, the play is because New York Times. And it's really about, I think we've got to the end of the kind of the big print era of the mainstream press. There's a quote on the back of it, actually, from Punch Sulzberger, the chairman of the New York Times, saying he doubts that they'll be printing the New York Times at all in 5 years. He said that in the end of January this year. And so what the book really is saying we are nearing the end of the era. That 5 years ago, if you said the Internet's really going to wipe out a lot of the Fourth Estate as it now exists, people would have said, I don't know about that. Now you have a lot of big chains are in really serious trouble. Knight Ridder got broken up, which, 20 years ago, Knight Ridder was the, Philadelphia Inquirer, the San Jose Mercury News, the Detroit Free Press. These were big, big papers. Now that's on the block. You've got the LA Times is up, they're just, will Eli Broad and his friend buy it from the Trib? I wrote for the LA Times on their op-ed for 10 years. You went in and it was a huge, powerful, rich, the dominant journalistic force in California. Well, it's still a big outfit, but it's the usual story with the print press. A lot of people have been taking, early retirement. The ads are all going away because of Craigslist, the story. That's one bit of it. But then we say, well, look, we're very critical of the mainstream press. I began 30 years ago in the Village Voice writing press criticism. I've done a lot of it. In fact, we say, the book really begins after Watergate, when the press was at its high esteem, Woodward, Bernstein, and all this stuff, and they toppled Nixon. And then we say, at that point in America, there was a spirit where really things might change. I mean, in the middle 70s, people really thought there could be a different place. And part of what happened, the press, the corporate mainstream press, meaning the Washington Post, New York Times, they saw it then as a period of reconsolidation. People shouldn't go too far. In fact, the late Katharine Graham gave a speech to the Publishers Association in the about 76, saying, enough already. It was basically addressed to a lot of journalists. Don't get too many ideas about changing the system here, and don't think you can tear down corporations the way you tore down the Nixon White House, and don't think we want to go on tearing down the White House. It was a call, basically it was waving a finger. And so we chronicle a good deal of that in the first half of the book. And then we go on, through, and we take some real case instances. Another benchmark, I think, in the decline, we attach great importance to it. And in fact, Jeffrey and I did this book, Whiteout.